All right. Welcome, everybody who is going to be watching in the ethers. So happy to have you here. And Dana, so happy to have you here. Thank you for joining Stories of Recovery. I wanted to just give you a little space to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Haley. I'm glad to be here too. My name is Dana. I'm an addict, an alcoholic in recovery. I am many things. I wear many hats, some of which are I'm also a yoga teacher and a meditation teacher, a mom, a wife, a mom to many different and unique humans. And yeah, I've been married for 10 years now, and in recovery for 13 this month. Um, so yeah, I think that's about what I'm gonna say today.
That's perfect. We were just in full transparency before the recording talking about how sometimes introducing ourselves can feel so complex because we're such dynamic human beings and there's so much to us, and how do we fit that into a small little elevator pitch? We can't really, right? So we just get
Yes.
into a little window into the vastness and complexity that you are.
Thank you.
Yeah, I always love to start these with just a little bit of grounding because honestly, yeah, I'm sure I say this every single time we do it, but I feel like if we all had space to do that before every interaction we had, like what a better world we would live in. So, if you want to just have a seat or wherever you are, whoever is watching, you're totally welcome to join. If you feel called to close your eyes, you can. If you'd rather have them open with a soft gaze, that's beautiful too. And just taking a breath in, and let's actually maybe start, exhale a sigh. And then twice more breathing in. Exhale a sigh or any other organic sound that might come out. Once more at your own pace. And then noticing the way that your body is connected to solid support underneath you. Notice if there's anywhere in your body that you're holding tension where it's possible to soften even just the tiniest amount more. Noticing what feels alive in you right now, and can you give whatever feels alive space to be here without needing to change or fix anything? Inviting our wholeness into this moment. And also inviting all that supports us into this moment in all realms. So whether that's a higher power of your understanding, guides, ancestors, angels, whatever your kind of personal cosmology is, just inviting in support. And the loving reminder that we are held in every moment. And taking one more breath. And then if eyes are closed, you can open them. Slowly taking a moment to just look around the space that you're in. Notice. Notice the way the light reflects off of things, colors, texture. And then when you're ready, coming back to the space.
Hmm.
Mm.
It's so cool. Every time I open my eyes after and like scan the room after closing them and going inside for a moment, I feel like I'm in a totally different room.
It's so true. It's so true. I know. I say that every time. It really is. it's amazing to me how profound it is what just a few moments can do, right? Like, because in my head,
Mhm.
I'm always like, I always like to overcomplicate stuff. I'm like, all right, if I'm going to do a practice, I need like, I need silence and nobody can talk to me, and it's like, oh, actually, sometimes all we need is just a couple minutes and that is enough.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. It's so true. We layer on all our stuff. But yeah, I'll just closing my eyes and opening my eyes. It's like, oh my gosh, look at this room.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it yet today, and I've been in it like a lot.
Oh my gosh. Yes, totally.
I don't want to sidetrack our conversation, but I wanted, you said something. What if we came into every interaction with a few moments of just grounding
Mhm.
and really becoming present? And this book, I think you're aware of it. It's restorative yoga for ethnic and race-based stress and trauma. There is a passage that it made me think of immediately this story about a volunteer, Peace Corps volunteer in Cameroon, and she's really eager to be helpful, and she's approaching these women, the women of the place of the village. They congregate around this watering place, and they have a lot of conversation. They're very lively, and this volunteer wants to be included so badly, and she keeps going up and trying to engage, and they're not engaging with her. So she asks another volunteer who has like great rapport with these women, like, what do you do? And the other volunteer informs her that there's a specific way to greet people, greet women before engaging in conversation. And the English translation is, are you in your skin?
Oh,
Is your soul in your body? Oh!
I'm like, that literally, I feel tears behind my eyes. I'm like, that is so beautiful and
It's
profound.
so it's so powerful, and it's I think and it makes me think of exactly that. Like before we interact with others, are you in your skin? Is your soul in your body? Now we can begin.
Yes. Oh my God. That's like both feels so radical and yet is like so like indigenous and ancient in us. And the
Yes.
bothness of that is so interesting to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. What a beautiful way to begin.
Totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay. And so with that, I would love for you to just share as much or as little of your story as you feel called in this moment of your recovery.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and again
Pauses.
connect to the truth, right? I want to just simply share my truth and get out of my own way. Mm. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So again, my name is Dana, and I came into recovery, um, floating on the boat of desperation, like just totally wrecked and a mess. um, Leading up to, I'll say this, drugs and alcohol for me, when I look back in retrospect, even before I started using, before I picked up my first substance of any kind, I was always looking for a way to feel a sense of belonging. And now that I have the language for it, I believe I was always in search of some sort of a spiritual experience, but I didn't have the language back then. And what that means for me today, a spiritual experience or being spiritually connected, is feeling like I'm supported, and a sense of feeling like a deep sense of belonging, and also not so trapped in my messy thoughts. Feeling like connected just to something bigger than myself when I'm not in my head, when my soul is in my body and I'm really in my skin. Like that, those are the experience that I started chasing at a young age. And I found them first through dance. When I would just, really check in. As much as it is to check out, it's also to check in. And then when I came became, a high schooler or whatever, and I started using and drinking and whatnot, I had that same feeling of checking out and also checking in, a sense of feeling like I was a part of something, a sense of being out, just out of the cycling monkey brain that I have, it really gave me a sense of feeling grounded, I guess, which is wild. In retrospect, it's wild. But that didn't last for me. You know what I mean? Like it was good maybe for like a little bit of time, and then I chased that feeling for years and years and years and years. And as I chased the feeling, my dependency on substances just kept growing and growing, greater and greater. And it actually started to do the opposite, where I was becoming more and more isolated and disconnected from myself, totally disconnected from others, and behaved in ways that I didn't know were possible, but it was part of my progressive disease. For me, it is a disease. My experience with it is that it runs in my family. There's a genetic component,
Mhm.
and I didn't know, much about that, but I knew that, drinking and using were things that we just did in our family. Everyone does it in our family and does it to excess. When I didn't decide that it was enough necessarily. It was almost like I was so out of control, I had nowhere left to go. If that makes sense. So floating in on the boat of desperation, I was um, on the verge of losing my home. Being kicked out of the home I was renting. I was completely dependent on alcohol, whereas like I had the shakes in the morning and delirium tremens throughout the day if I didn't drink. My central nervous system was totally dependent. And I have many children. My oldest is now 23. At the time, he was 10, and I wasn't showing up for him in a proper motherly way. I was doing my best with what I had, but it wasn't good, and it wasn't good. And my relationship was falling apart. Just everything was crumbling. Everything was crumbling, and it was like I felt like I was just all out of tricks. I couldn't do anything. I was done. I was tired. I was exhausted. I was lonely. I was broken and desperate. And I'm lucky in that way or I needed to be desperate in order to seek change, because I have a crafty little mind, that's going to look for all the different ways that I can continue manipulating, using all of those things that we do.
Yeah, totally.
So my story, my recovery began a few days before I actually went into inpatient treatment, and I spoke with someone over the phone. It was like the AA number in the phone book, Alcoholics Anonymous, for anyone who's not familiar with AA. And someone spoke to me over the phone and kind of explained to me what's happening. I didn't know, like,
Mm.
why my body was acting the way it was, why I was hallucinating. Um, and they explained, and then I went into residential treatment soon after, and thankfully I did know that my tricky mind just needed that. I needed to be removed from society. I needed to just be in a place where that was highly structured and highly disciplined, and just was all about recovering, um, in order for me to stay sober, was my feeling, and I think I was right.
Mm.
So yeah, I stayed for a long time. I stayed for 5 months, and then I transitioned to an SLE after that. And I was at that point in my recovery very willing. If someone said, push a peanut down the middle of the road with your nose naked, I would have done it. So thank goodness people are cool. As I was desperate, like, just tell me what to do and I will do it. And so I continued to take the suggestions that were suggested from people who had been around longer than I had been. And lo and behold, they worked for me.
Mm.
Um, yeah, connecting to a higher power through the work for me, working the steps of recovery was my first introduction, my first personal introduction to the concept of a power greater than myself. Uh, in retrospect, that's funny. It's like I thought like I was it. And, um, so anyway, and I'm not, I'm not it. Um,
Goodness, right? Although it
yeah,
doesn't feel like that always.
it
Sometimes,
doesn't always.
dang it.
No. No, no, no. But even like, the hubris, like even the power of a collective is just like so obvious, and or the power of nature, or
Yeah.
the power of the ocean. And I just I really backed myself into this very small way of thinking. And so my thinking began to broaden, and I gained more understanding of myself and of how to be in the world, and in community and relationship with others without causing as much harm, hopefully, and stopping the behaviors that brought me shame and made me want to continue the spiral and the cycle of drinking and using. Um, yeah, and what else? I would say that like yesterday I had a bad day, right? Like I was tired. My daughter wasn't feeling well the night before last, and she's 6, almost 7 now. And she woke up at like 1:30 in the morning, and she was clearly not well because she was crying. And she wakes up at night a lot, but she doesn't wake up crying, or it's typically a little easier to like soothe her into some space, but she was just inconsolable. So I was up most of the night from like 1 to 5:30, and I got maybe 3.5, 4 broken hours of sleep. And so yesterday I was dragging, and I was like, oh, I'm so tired, all this and that. And I said to my husband, gosh, I feel kind of miserable today. He's like, ugh, on a scale of like 1 to, whatever, like how bad? And I thought, honestly, it's not that bad. He's like, when have you felt worse? And I said, well, definitely like I've got lots of worse days
Yeah,
than this.
totally.
Specifically when I was, waiting at the liquor store at 8 a.m. And shaking.
Yes.
It
You
was
know
good to
it
have.
today is not going to be great when that's how you start it.
No, I will take 3.5 hours of broken sleep sober over any of those days, like especially my last days of drinking or using. I would take today over those days any day of the week. And that's true for me. Like my life is beautiful and colorful, and sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's easy. But I feel like living life on life's terms is something that I learned once I stopped using and started working on myself through a program of recovery and through other modalities like yoga and meditation and whatnot. Is that the present moment is really there's nothing that gets thrown my way or our way. I believe that we can't necessarily meet. We can meet the moment if it's hard or if it's wonderful, and everything in between.
Yeah. Ugh, yes. Gosh. I mean, there's so many, yeah, so many threads and so many good things that you've just said that I'm like wanting to pull at. And I so appreciate you to just speaking to really, yeah, what it is to be sober, which is to say that sometimes, yeah, life is hard.
Mm,
And yet we are so we feel so much more equipped to meet life on life's terms when we have a foundation of recovery, and I feel the exact same way where it's like I can be, moving through difficult things, whether that's, like not sleeping because of our children, or moving through grief, and or even like our, our trauma and like what's happening collectively in the world. Like there's so much, and yet um prior to recovery I didn't have a capacity to show up to any of it or feel any of it or even really be aware of any of it, truth be
Mm,
told. Like I
yeah.
remember when I first got sober and realized like, oh, I had no idea how much fear I had. I had no idea how much pain I really was in, because that becomes kind of a baseline experience. But then we get into recovery and we start to have these tools where it's like even our worst day is just 100 times better than any day we
Mhm.
spend before getting sober. And I love when we get to talk about that out loud to people, because I think that that's one of the biggest hurdles, I think, especially for people who are newer in recovery, is that there's not yet been that internal paradigm shift where, when we're newly in recovery, I remember being like, oh my God, like life isn't going to be fun anymore.
Oh
What
my
am I going to
gosh.
do? Yeah, like I don't even like anything other than alcohol and drugs. I don't have friends anymore. Like, I don't know what my
Yeah.
interests are. And so there's this sense, I think, in early recovery, like, oh, life is going to suck being sober,
Mhm.
and it's just so not true. I mean, sometimes it sucks a little in the beginning. Let's just be real about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. It can. It can.
It can. It can. There can be days that are really, really hard, and that I know I did in the beginning. Sometimes had days where I'm like, I don't know if I could stay sober for another day. And yet it's like I'm always like they say that in 12-step rooms, right? Of like, don't quit before the miracle happens, because it's
Right.
like it's just so true. It's like if we stay sober, it gets so much better. And then life is infinitely more beautiful than it ever was before sobriety.
I totally agree. Account it made me think of, and I know it's written somewhere and it stuck with me because I felt this way, that I was afraid if I put down alcohol and drugs, like who would I be? I would be like the hole in the donut
Yeah.
is like the right? Like what else? I don't know what's left. There's nothing left. Take that away and I have nothing. I thought I had nothing.
Mhm.
And interestingly enough, there's the principle of in yoga now that starting to click for me, and thinking about the fear of death.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if this is appropriate, but I'm going to say it anyways.
So,
I'm
please.
going here.
I love it. Let's go there. Yeah.
I was driving to the coast with my family, and I was like staring out the window, which became kind of a meditative experience. And it hit me that perhaps my fear of putting down the alcohol and the drugs and being the hole in the donut is similar to, let's say, my fear of death.
Mm.
Whereas I didn't know that putting down the drugs and the alcohol, I didn't know that my life was going to explode with, color
Yeah.
in many ways, in beautiful ways. And the same, perhaps that's similar to like if we pass into the next, you know, realm. And I'm not sure what I believe around that. And I don't want to, say that I do, because I don't, but I'm starting to explore the thoughts and how often that might be true in many different ways, right? We are afraid to make a leap or a change because we're not sure who will be on the other side. And there's just there's so much possibility that we don't really know what's next.
That's so true. That's so true. I love that you shared that. And because really that's another kind of thread from what you shared that I was thinking about as you were talking, is this is when we finally make the choice to get sober, it's like there is a death of sorts, right? Like, first of all,
Mm.
there's like an ego death. I mean, like coming in, talk about coming in desperate. Like my ego is just so I mean, my ego is both alive and well, but also just like so decimated in so many ways,
Yeah.
like you were saying, you were like, I was out of tricks, and we have those tricky minds. And that's like was part of my ego prior to recovery too, where I'm like, oh, I can actually figure out a way to control this. And I actually don't need that person's help. And I actually don't need to listen to the suggestion of this person, because I can figure it out on my own. And like,
Mhm.
and that kind of like lone wolf, mentality. And then, yeah, I finally got to a point too, where I just was so desperate and was like, oh, I actually cannot do this on my own. And the part of me that is clinging on for dear life to that story has to die in a way, and so I just think that that's so interesting, because I think that that's we do that when we have like, it's like that's what transformation is, in a sense, right? It's actually like transformation, I think it often gets this very kind of like pretty, like, oh, we're transforming, but it's like transformation is an inherently destructive and messy process. Like when we are in transformation, that shit is messy. um,
Yes.
and so I love that you're bringing in this kind of question of death, because I do think that that's so something we fear. And I'm sure in such a primal way, it's like that's what's coming up when we're at the end, or when we're kind of like at our bottom, right? Where it's like the
Yeah.
last vestiges of the life that we've had. We're like, oh my God, like I think I'm gonna have to give this up. And like that's terrifying. Who will I be on the other side? Just as you said, you know?
Yeah.
And yet, yeah. And yet, like, but the thing that's so cool and that I love about getting to talk to other people who have time is like we've we and yeah, we've come to the other side, right? And so experientially now, when I move through other things in my life, which is not to say that I don't resist like ego death or like little d deaths throughout my life of like parts of me and people I used to be, because I definitely do, but I also feel like at least now I have experience that, and therefore a little bit more trust that like, okay, what is on the other side of what feels painful right now, may very well be actually more beautiful than I can imagine in this moment.
Mhm.
Mm,
At
mhm.
a minimum,
Yeah,
you're gonna be okay.
yeah, totally, totally. At a
Oh,
minimum,
that's great, Haley.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Mhm. Yeah, something that also I've been thinking about a lot, just as far as what it means in these conversations to really speak to. I mean, really, of course, this podcast is for anybody who identifies being in recovery, but I also, I think we're kind of trained from our 12-step experience, and it feels important to be also of the mind of speaking to people who are newer in recovery,
Yeah.
and something that I've been thinking about a lot, and that's actually been coming up, in coaching calls that I've had and stuff, is this question of the inner experience, right? Because I think that there's, in kind of normal world, whatever that means, people don't necessarily share about what their inner dialogue is like, and so somebody newer in recovery, and I know for me, when I was in recovery, I had such shame based, self-critical, really harsh inner dialogue that I thought that I, one, deserved all of that, and two, like that I didn't think anybody else had that, because on the outside people appear to have their, whatever, instagrammable lives and stuff together, and so
Mhm.
um and so I'm curious, like, how you feel, if you feel called, and you don't have to, of course, but like to give a little window into potentially what your inner dialogue was like when you were newer in recovery, and how that has shifted for you as you've continued on in recovery. And that's a big thing. So
That's yeah, I'm glad we're doing this. Thank you for asking me that because I haven't thought about that um in a long time.
Mhm.
It's been a while, but I will do my best to recall that, and what comes up right away is that it was constant.
Mhm.
My inner dialogue was incredibly shame-based. I was the biggest, can I swear on here? I, yeah, I was the biggest piece of shit, like, to walk the earth in my mind, And goodness, I had such shaky just faith in anything and everything or anyone, including myself. I remember feeling just very lost and vulnerable. My inner dialogue was mean,
Yeah.
and the world was scary, and I didn't, I just didn't feel very trustful. I did not feel happy, joyous, and free. That's for sure. People would talk about that, when I would go to recovery meetings, feeling happy, joyous, and free, and I wanted that so badly, but I certainly didn't feel that way, not for a while.
Mhm.
Um, it was probably, I want to say, when I say not for a while, I say not for a while because the first 30 days or so felt like an eternity. The days, they go slow, one day at a time. 24 hours is a long time. It's a long time.
Mhm.
without, the use of substances, if that's what I've been, what I'd been doing for years. 24 hours was a freaking miracle. So the first 30 days, that was a long time. But when the inner dialogue started to shift was probably about between 30 and 90 days. Like the self-talk, the inner dialogue wasn't quite as harsh. I was picking up, you know, things from what I heard from others. Really it was just being around people who were either exactly where I was, in terms of time, or had been there before, but hearing their stories and and like finding some hope,
Mhm.
um started to shift like the scariness of the world for me. Like maybe it won't be so bad long term. And then, you know, I remember that, my inner dialogue changed when my external life started to look different. That was true for me. My inner dialogue didn't change necessarily first. I believe externally, like things started to shift, and then inside it started to shift too. And externally, things were looking better. Like, I was combing my hair regularly. I was brushing my teeth daily. And I'm talking like the basics, because I had lost, connection to basic hygiene by the time I
Same,
got here.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't cute.
No.
It was not cute. Um, yeah, but, well, so yeah, so and then, like, creating, like, routines and habits, and, like, picking up some sort of, like, spiritual literature in the mornings, or, like, having my, creating rituals. And I didn't call them that at the time, but creating rituals, um started to give me a sense of like feeling safe, and like I had like a container that I was working in, and this is safe for me. I started listening to positive affirmations about 90 days sober, and I would listen to them through my headphones, and then I would repeat them often, and I would say them often, like because I was still in the habit of really talking terribly to myself. I would say them all the time, especially if I was, as I was going to a job interview. As I stayed sober, things started to happen. Like I got a job, and I paid off, like, I had all these tickets I had to pay off. So I went to court, and on my way to do these very, that may seem like simple life things that were very complicated to me at the time. When we're new, I think they're big steps. I would listen to positive affirmations. I would say them to myself, and I would try and get into the habit of interrupting negative thoughts with more positive thoughts about myself. And that's something I still do today.
Mhm, mhm. Absolutely. Yeah.
You too?
Yes, totally, totally. Yeah, I've gone on a bit of an interesting journey with affirmation because when I first got sober, same thing, I discovered affirmation, and that was so needed for me.
Mm.
Um, and and certainly helped to a degree, that kind of like, yeah, reprogramming our neural pathways, right, to be geared toward more positive thought patterns and ways of being. But I also found that I sometimes still experienced a block around certain affirmations that felt
Mm.
challenging. And then when I started to really dive into, yeah, like teaching yoga and understanding the body and the way that we store trauma in our body and our nervous systems, I started to understand why sometimes I would be saying affirmations, but it's like my nervous system was kind of calling bullshit on me. Like I would say an affirmation, but I didn't really believe it. And so,
Totally.
like, my body was kind of responding like, nah, like that's not real. And so then I kind of shifted away from affirmation, because I think what was happening, and I didn't fully have language for it in the moment, but what I kind of understand in retrospect is that the way that I was using it was sometimes a little bit bypassy and wasn't like acknowledging fully what was actually happening for me. And so
Mm.
it like kind of took me some time to figure out how to kind of like work with affirmation in a way that actually feels supportive to my nervous system and feels like embodied for me.
Oh
And
yeah.
that may also just be like, yeah, I also tend to be like well, I don't want to say that. I was gonna make a judgment on myself that I don't, is true, but but I don't have to say that about myself. Anyway, all to say that yes, I've now actually recently, just in the last, kind of 6 months, come back to a place where I do affirmation consistently on a daily basis. And I'm finding it to be so supportive. But the secret for me is that the affirmation has to come with a feeling. Like if I'm just, saying words in my mind, and not really feeling those words, then the affirmation doesn't do a lot for me. But if I can cultivate a feeling in accordance with the affirmation, then that is what feels really transformative for me. And so yeah, that was a very long-winded response.
So cool. And thank you for saying that, especially calling out the bypassy, ness of a lot of things. It does not everything lands, not everything resonates. And I think that that's a really important, call out. So yeah, nice stuff. And I hear you and I feel you. I feel you. Yes. Not everything, that is suggested feels true for
Totally.
me either.
Totally.
Yeah. And
Totally.
over time that has changed too. Whereas like I said at the beginning, tell me to push a peanut down the street, naked, I'm gonna do it. And that's like how I came in, and over time as it's become much more personal
Yeah,
and real, because I know myself now in a way that I didn't when I first got here around
totally.
here.
Totally, absolutely. And something you kind of mentioned as well is how started to change behavior that were causing you to feel shame, right? And I think
Right.
and that too feels like, just kind of to piggyback on some of what you were saying, like that feels like the transformative piece around that inner dialogue as well, right? Where it's like, and you said it's like the external things change. It's like, oh, I started taking different actions and showing up in a different way. And then that
Yeah.
informed the way that I was then feeling about myself and talking about myself, because I was actually like doing things from a place of integrity, like showing up
Yeah.
when I say that I'm going to show up, and those things inherently build self-esteem, And so I love that we're talking
Yeah.
about that, because I think sometimes people are like, can't even, and I was this way in early recovery too. I'm like, I can't even conceive of having any other inner dialogue than what I have. How do you get there? And it's like, and these are some of what we're
These are
talking
some of the things. Someone simply, I'm not the first person to say it, and I don't remember who said it, but I've heard it many times. If you want to build your self-esteem, do esteemable acts.
about. Yes.
It's really that simple. And sometimes we don't know. We just need a lot of direction, I think, when we come in on what is an esteemable act. Like, can you tell me? Can you spell it out for me? Because
Yes.
I don't know. We need people to help, help us along.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. Yeah, yeah, that piece too, the community piece is so vital. Is so vital. Where have you? I mean, I think we both, talked a little bit about our 12-step experience, and if you feel called to share more about that, please. But also wondering too, like for you, what has it been like to build community as a person in recovery?
Hmm. It has been a slow and steady, sometimes challenging process. I am an introverted person by nature. I am even a little shy. It doesn't seem like it, but I am. Sometimes, well, people say it doesn't seem like it, but it's the truth. Um, and so yeah, I am not a big group person, like big groups of people. Building community for me has been finding a couple of people who, I feel like I love them almost instantly. Does that make sense? Like certain people, I don't know. It's like we're just meant to be friends or meant to know each other. Um, yeah, and it's community has turned into me as finding people who are just on similar paths and of similar thinking or like-mindedness, and not necessarily everyone has to be the same and think exactly as I think, because actually that would be really boring and that would suck. But yeah, so my recovery community was the first like family feeling that I felt in a long time after being isolated, maybe back to like like on my raver days, like I felt like, oh, okay, these are my people. The way I felt like, in 1995. And then, and since then, like I felt more comfortable finding my people in other places, around other interests like yoga and healing and justice and color and feminine, the females, women. I did not have a lot of female friends before I got sober, and that has changed 180 degrees. Where today, like, I only wanted to hang out with my guy friends because they didn't expect much from me. Is how is
Yes,
how it showed up. Is that true for you too?
totally.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I didn't trust women. I didn't trust women at all.
I didn't trust women either, and I wasn't trustworthy.
Exactly. I think that's honestly what it was for me, where I was like, I didn't trust women. And it's because deep down I knew the kind of woman that I was behaving as.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Totally.
Yeah. I don't know if I answered, but that's what came up, right? It's yeah, and so today, like, I really value my female friendships so much.
Me too.
I just had a romantic weekend with my friend, and it was a, like we went to like the most romantic place, like, and I didn't realize it was even like that. Last weekend, was it? Yeah, we went to
Yes,
Big Sur.
I saw pictures
Oh,
of that. Oh my
it
God.
was
So,
so wonderful. I highly recommend going to romantic places with friends because
yeah.
it was just really lovely, and we had such a great time. But I did laugh quite a bit at ourselves. We were the only non-romantic couple, like, for miles. It was hilarious. We went-
Amazing. I think that's so perfect though, because it's just such a reminder that there's so many different kinds of intimacy and that they're all needed. And I think that unfortunately, often in our culture, we're taught these very confining and limited ideas of like what relationships can look like. And that's again like yet another gift of recovery, right? It's like that we get to come into recovery and learn that actually there's so many beautiful ways to be in relationship with one another, and yet it's hard to be in relationship unless you are doing your own work, right?
oh yeah.
Intimacy isn't possible unless you are, yeah, working in some kind of a way.
Word. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Ugh, yay. Uh, I'm like, yay, relationships, yay,
Yay relationships. Yay community is right.
community. I know. Well, and you spoke to that too earlier when you were sharing about how it's just so interesting to me how, for me, it was the same where I started drinking and using because I wanted to feel more grounded or feel more connected to people. And like that did work for a period of time, worked better than it had been, maybe kind of, I thought. But then, I got to a point where it just changed completely and it wasn't working at all anymore. And in fact, it was making it so much worse, disconnecting me even more. And really then what was required in order for the thing that I wanted initially to begin with, which was connection, um, and to feel like okay in my skin, was actually the thing that felt the hardest, and like which was recovery, right? And so yeah, I'm just so grateful to get to build relationships as a person in recovery today. It's such a gift. And
Absolutely.
but
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know. Like we were kind of talking about before and at the beginning, like we all wear all these different hats, and but we are 100% of everything that we do and who we are, right? Um and like the relationships, like, with ourselves obviously is greatly damaged when we come in, and we get to repair that and do some inner work and whatnot, and then our relationships with others. And I don't know, when I came in new, like I felt like I had, I burned so many bridges with family, like my mother, my father, my friends, my son, my oldest. And Um, and we get to make amends over time. We get to show up as different people, in the process of healing. And those relationships change. And I remember that being a big deal for me, was like, um, will I ever feel good about who I am in relation to the people I love the most again? And the
Mhm.
answer is yes, with time. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we have our own, if anyone's a person who has children or is considering it, or it doesn't even matter, children or not, but especially for me, like, I'm a mom of many kids now. And it's so, I think my favorite, my husband and I are both in recovery. My favorite thing to be reminded of is that my hope is that we get to break, the cycle of addiction and trauma in the home as a result, as best we can. It stops here. It stopped with us. We'll see what happens with them. I always joke, like, I wonder what they'll be in therapy, talking about one day. and, and this is, a genetic component, but my hope is that, we're healing. We're healing our lines in some way.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for saying that. I feel the same, and my husband is also in recovery, and
Cool.
to get to do that as a family really feels like, God, I mean, such a privilege to, yeah, to be, we get to be breakers of chains,
Mhm.
and yeah, especially now having a daughter, I think about that constantly, is just, who am I being and how am I showing up and what am I teaching her every single moment through my actions, whether I'm even doing it consciously or not,
Yeah.
and to be sober and therefore even get to have the clarity to be conscious of those questions is just so incredible. Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious, how your experience of motherhood has shifted in recovery. And really, like, I guess I'm also just asking selfishly because I'm always like, oh, I love, talking to moms who are in recovery now, because it just is, it's such a wild ride. And I mean, I've only been a mom for less than a year, but already I'm like, I mean, what a spiritual journey this is, of being, and how more is revealed, and the way that I move through the world is, it feels like in some ways there's kind of my own, like, it's like almost like a, what's the word I'm looking for, it's like a like even a magnifying glass even more so on my stuff, because I'm aware now that it's impacting another tiny human in a way that just wasn't a thing obviously before I was a mom. And so I'm just curious. I mean, that's a very open-ended question, but
I don't know. That's going to be I don't know. Except I do know that I'm present as a result of
yes,
being in recovery.
yes.
And that, that opens the door for opportunity, again and again, to make more sound choices. And there's also moments when the choices aren't the greatest, and or the response isn't, you know, mothering is hard.
Yeah, for
Mothering is hard.
yeah, it's yeah.
It is hard,
Mhm,
and beautiful and wonderful. And but like you said, recovery, it gives us the opportunity to
mhm,
be present
mhm.
and to make hopefully better choices every day.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
yes. What a humbling experience for sure.
absolutely. It really is. And they one thing that I feel is very different this time around, because I had my son before I came into recovery, and then I parent obviously parented him, ever since, and then I have two other living children here. Um, One thing that I can say is different is that I think prior I think there was a need to, or a feeling that there was a need to control my child. And that sounds terrible. saying it out loud. But that's what it was in essence, was like, controlling the outcomes of their life in some way. And now I don't feel the need to do that. I feel the need to create, a safe space and develop good habits that are just healthy habits in general. But I'm really more interested to see what they reveal to me about who they are
Mm,
versus before I was, I think parenting was just from a different place, and that wouldn't have happened without, I think, the combination of recovery, of yoga, of healing, and the spiritual journeys that we're on. So,
yes. Oh, I love that so much. Like when you said just now the part about it's more about letting them reveal to you who they are. Like I felt such a softening and like really opening in my heart space and in my body because I mean what better gift to be able to give our children than space to just let them be who they are and not have to control. And also like I the impulse to control is so human because we're like, oh, I'm responsible for this tiny human. Like I need to make sure that I'm protecting them and making sure that nothing bad ever happens to them. But like I feel those feelings are there for me too, for sure. And then, but just so the reminder that it's like, oh yes, they have their own higher power and they have
yeah.
their own path and they have their own sole purpose that they've come onto this planet with that we just get to create the conditions for that to thrive in. And it's yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
I agree. That was beautifully said, Haley.
What you said was beautifully said. Everything you've been saying is so beautifully
Oh, thanks. Who knows what's coming out? Oh,
said. And I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but just wondering to close, a question that I always love to ask on this is just if you could share a little bit about what your understanding of a higher power looks like today, because I think that that's a real sticking point for so many people is either feeling like they don't know what that is or what that looks like or what feels like. And so as much as is possible, I'm finding it to be it feels important to be able to kind of offer as many different points of view around that as possible.
yeah, it is a sticking point, isn't it? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Yeah, it was a tough one for me. Um, and today, I'm going to say it's pretty undefined. And it is the moments when my hair stands up on my arms, when I'm deeply touched by something someone says, or a sweeping view that just like takes my breath away. It's in the grace, like in really tough moments that, like there's just can't see a way through, but there's the grace and strength that I feel in those moments feels like my higher power. Um, and I don't know if that's very helpful, but that's the truth for me. It's just, it's in the love that I feel for my family. It's in, my sweet cat. It's kind of everything, it's everything, and it's just it and I can feel it, but I don't see it. I
Mhm.
feel it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that and think that that's so beautiful and so important too. And I love that you say that it's undefined because I think that to me like that's kind of like the point in a way, right? Is like that it's a mystery in a sense, and
Mm.
yet it's something that we deeply know because we feel it, and you're speaking to those feelings. And even when you named those things as what you feel, it's like I feel something when you say that too, is like and so then that makes me think about and especially from a yogic perspective, right? Like the idea of our kind of oneness and union, where it's like there are these experiences that we can name, and while we all have a kind of different lived understanding of what that is based on our experience, there's also like a similarity and a shared kind of universal sense that we can get from that, and to sort of think of that even as part of what you're describing is so beautiful. Yeah.
Thanks. What about you? I'm
Mm,
here.
yeah.
What's your definition today, if any?
Totally. Yeah, mine is constantly changing also, and for me that's really the beauty of a higher power, is that it gets to change constantly. Like it never is needs to be fixed. And so yeah, for me it also in so many ways is a feeling, and specifically lately I've been doing a lot of inner work, and this has also been part of my affirmation practice, but like around really cultivating a feeling of worthiness, and like a worthiness that is independent of what other people think about me.
Hmm.
You know?
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and like I mean, I also just have to stress that like there's so much room to grow, and by no means have I like mastered that, or don't I still care what people think about me, and that still impacts me often. But I feel like I'm starting to, part of my affirmation practice and cultivating a feeling of worthiness is remembering that I like am a child of God, and I think that that word can be sticky for some people. For me, I've had to do a lot of work on that for sure, but yeah, this feeling of inherent belonging because I am here on this planet in this moment in time, and there is a reason for that, and I believe that that is on purpose. And so if that is true, then like I belong here, and also I'm already enough as I am, and really trying to cultivate that feeling within me. And truth be told, some days it feels really hard to cultivate that feeling, and then I also have moments where I can really feel it, and in those moments I'm like, okay, like this is what it feels like to feel connected to a higher power for me.
Mm.
So that's part of it. And then I think a lot of it too lately is also, my ancestral work. Like for me, when I think about my lineage, and I've been doing a lot of healing around my ancestral lines, and when I can attune to, what I believe is the fact that I have thousands of ancestors who are supporting me in spirit, like that to me also is a higher power, that I can really feel, and can in a matter of moments like shift how I'm experiencing the world, like take me from a place of fear and mistrust to like, oh yes, I'm being guided and I'm held right now. And it's like that transition from feeling small and scared and mistrusting to feeling more expansive and in a place of faith, and knowing that there is a path that I'm on, whether I see what the full path is or not, um, for me feels like an experience of being connected to a higher power too, for sure.
That's awesome. That is super awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this. This is so fun.
Thank you for having me. This was really a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Totally.
enjoyed it.
Totally. Yes. Me too. I know. We should do it again. I'm like, can we just be having like, we could
Let's
just have,
just go get some coffee.
yeah.
You come to Portland, I come to Bend. Yes.
Yes. Yes. Do you have any plans to come to Bend recently?
Yeah, yes, I do. I don't have dates, but my mom lives in Bend still, and so we have reason to visit, and it's been a minute, so we're due to come out definitely this summer.
Oh, good.
And when I do, I will call you.
Yes, I would love that. I would love that so much. Well, thank you again so much for being here and just for sharing yourself so authentically, and your wisdom and experience. It's just so welcomed, and I'm so grateful that we got
Thank you, Haley.
that. Yes. And thank you to everybody who's watching, and wishing everyone ease and joy. And see you next time.